Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's assembly. I'm going to be talking to you about the best ways to learn online. And just to make really clear, this isn't about what you're doing with school at the moment. This is about what you are able to do using the internet at home, and everything I talk about can be done from the simplest of smartphones. You don't need any other technology apart from that. So, why do we need to talk about learning online? Well, we lose something by not being in school. I'm sure there are some of you that are feeling moderately happy about not having to go to school every single day, and that's perfectly natural. But actually, most of the students that I speak to also recognise that they're losing out on something quite important here. And the longer that we're not in school, the longer that we miss out on our learning. And there's a few reasons for this that I just wanted to briefly talk about. First of all, face-to-face explanations. There's actually good scientific evidence that it is easier to understand somebody when they are face-to-face with you and explaining something. And this is because communication isn't just our voice, it is also our body language. And it's really, really hard to understand somebody when you can't see their body language, because often we communicate with movements of our hands, with nodding of our head, shaking of our head. And as a result, when somebody is explaining something difficult to us, it's actually harder to learn it and understand it without seeing their face. Obviously, when you're in school, you get all of those non-verbal cues to help you to understand those difficult concepts. In school, you learn from your peers, you learn from your friends, you learn from your classmates. In lessons, you hear other people giving contributions to questions that the teachers put up. You hear you can pass your work over to your partner and they will mark it for you and tell you what you need to do better. You can learn from all of your peers in school. And at the moment, a lot of that just doesn't exist. And finally, and this one again might not be popular with all of you, but the expectations of your teachers. It is a lot harder for your teachers to expect work from you when you're at home. And it is a lot easier for you to be lazy and to not work hard because you don't have your teachers standing over you and pressuring you to do the work. And the reason why we do that is because we care so much about your progress. And so when you don't have that, your progress will slow. So all of this sounds quite negative, and to be very honest with you, it is. That's why we have schools. But in the meantime, we need to take up a new opportunity. We need to be able to learn online. So how do we do that? Well, how can you learn using the internet? I'm going to talk you through 3 ways. We can learn about news and current affairs. We can learn academic resources, learn from academic resources, and we can finally follow up on personal interests. And I'm going to talk you through exactly how you can do that. So, news and current affairs. It is vital during this period that you take the massive opportunity to educate yourself about the news and about the world. This is a really stressful time for many people, and it's really important that you understand what is going on. What is happening is really, really, really unusual. In fact, it hasn't happened in Europe for about 100 years, since there was an influenza epidemic after the First World War. And knowing about it and learning about it is a really important part of dealing with it. And it's not just that, you're able to learn about everything that's happening in the world at the moment. And you can do this all from, as I said, the simplest smartphone. However, there are problems with online news access. It's harder to know what news sources are reliable. So I'm going to talk you through that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But it is difficult when you're on the internet to know if what you're reading is true or false or partial or biased. It's important to understand the role of social media, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how news and social media interact. And then finally, you must understand political perspective, and I'm going to show you how that works in the next couple of slides. Okay, here is a news feed from YouTube. Now, YouTube is a really bad website to get your news from. When I speak to bridge students in sixth form, YouTube is the site that they most often claim that they get their news from. YouTube, Instagram, and sometimes even Snapchat. Now, Why is YouTube a really bad website to get your news from? Well, YouTube has what's called an algorithm. And what that algorithm does is it takes every bit of information that you are giving your search, if you're using something like if you're using Google Chrome, and it will spit out the videos that match the kinds of things that you're searching for. So, for example, if I search football and I go and read a football website, or if I go into YouTube and put watch football videos, the recommended videos in my newsfeed will then be about football disproportionately. And so what happens with YouTube is the more that you search for something, the more that your feed will be filled with that thing. And that means that your newsfeed becomes biased and it becomes really, really one-sided. So please do not use YouTube as your primary source of news. The second problem with it, as you can see here, is you've got top news and you've got 4 news videos. Now, each of those news videos is actually from a news website. They're from newspapers, The Telegraph and The Sun. But because it's YouTube, you don't really pay much attention to which newspaper has put that video up. So you just think of it as news. But The Sun and The Telegraph are actually very right-wing news sources, as we're going to see in a second, which means that they are biased towards a certain perspective. And if you just watch that video as straightforward news, you would not realise that you are actually watching something from a particular perspective. Instagram. Now, Instagram is, again, a really bad place to get your news for really similar reasons to YouTube. Depending on the people that you follow, you are going to see only one certain perspective on the world. You are not going to get a balanced perspective. And in particular, you will get the perspectives of celebrities disproportionately if you follow them on Instagram. Okay, so what would be reliable news sources? Now, I obviously haven't put all of the reliable news sources that there possibly are up onto here, but what I've done is I've thought about the most popular ones in the UK and the ones that are closest to guaranteeing you detailed, fair analysis of the news. Right in the middle, we have the BBC. Now, you'll see on the left-hand arrow, you've got left-wing, and on the right-hand arrow, you've got right-wing. If you have a right-wing perspective in politics, that is the Conservative Party, okay, the Tories. So a right-wing perspective, roughly speaking, and it will take a while to explain this in a lot of detail, but roughly speaking means that you believe in individual responsibility, so people are responsible for their own actions. You believe in low taxes for everybody, because you believe that the economy should be creating wealth for everybody. It isn't really the government's job to look after people so much as private businesses' job to look after people. So right-wing perspectives often cut things like benefits and housing allowances, and they cut the public sector more generally in order to reduce taxes for people so that there's more money in people's private accounts to spend. A left-wing perspective would be the Labour Party, and it's the opposite. So high taxes, particularly on the rich, in order to pay for state interventions, so things like the NHS or paying for welfare for benefits. So you have left-wing perspectives, high taxes, the Labour Party, right-wing perspective, low taxes, the Conservative Party. If you don't know this, you don't really understand the news that you're looking at. The BBC, there's lots of arguments about this, but it is pretty fair to say the BBC comes down the middle. The BBC has to be impartial. However, they are journalists at the BBC, and so they will try and report facts. Sometimes the facts will be damaging to the government, sometimes the facts will be supportive to the government. The BBC tries to be impartial and fair down the middle. You will see some left-wing people saying the BBC is right-wing and some right-wing people saying the BBC is left-wing, but I would say that by far the most reliable centre-ground source for your news should be the BBC. You should have this app on your phone. It should be the first stop for your news, not because everything you read on BBC News is going to be accurate and correct and the best thing you could read, but because it will tell you what most other people in the country are currently seeing as the news. So the BBC News would be a really, really, really good app to install if you haven't currently got it. Now, to the right-wing perspectives, the Times and the Telegraph. So the Times is centre-right, so that means that it's not quite it's not the far extremes of right-wing, but it is centre-right. It tends to be supportive of the Conservative Party, and again supportive of low taxes. The Times and the Telegraph, both right-wing newspapers, you both have to pay to subscribe to them. There really are not very many right-wing newspapers that you don't have to pay for. The Daily Mail is one. However, the Daily Mail has a less good reputation for accuracy and fairness than the Telegraph and the Times. The Independent is it's a little bit of it's a bit independent, to be honest. It's quite hard to pigeonhole exactly what the perspective of the Independent is, but they run very interesting articles across the political spectrum, but generally speaking, they are centre-left. They don't tend to support the Conservative Party or the Conservative government, and they tend to argue for greater freedom for individuals and particularly environmental issues are contained within in the Independent. And then finally, The Guardian is kind of the most high-profile left-wing newspaper, tends to be broadly supportive of the Labour Party and against the government. And again, that's all of these are broadsheet newspapers, apart from the BBC News, which is obviously connected to the television coverage. So the reason why I recommend these as your primary news sources is because the journalists that work for these organisations are well trained, and their job is to try and determine the truth. They will try as much as they can to be less biased, although, as I've said, they are coming at things from a political perspective, and that is really important to understand. So if you see a YouTube video and it's from the Telegraph or it's from the Guardian, you need to think, okay, this will be an interesting and reliable source of information. However, they are going to probably support the government or be against the government, be left-wing or be right-wing. If you use these 5 news sources to inform you, you will be really well informed. You will understand what is going on in this country and around the world. It is not to say, however, that they should be your only news sources. We are currently seeing at the moment protests in America after the murder of George Floyd. And one of the problems with these news sources in front of you is that they are predominantly, about 95% of British journalism is white. And so one of the criticisms we could throw at these particular news organisations is that they don't display the concerns of the BAME community enough. And so that would be a good example of why we could also be critical of these reliable news sources. There are similar criticisms based on gender and on sexuality. Okay, academic resources. So we've looked a bit at how you can use the news to inform you. It's worth just very quickly mentioning that you can get the apps for all of these on your phone, on your tablets, on your computer. You can just search for them. The Times and the Telegraph, however, you will have to pay a small amount a month if you want to access their articles. Wikipedia, when used right, can be a really, really good resource, as I'll talk about in a second, for academic, for learning. BBC Bitesize is really good, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about careful Googling. Okay, Wikipedia. Wikipedia has a bad reputation, and I think it's unfair now, actually. When Wikipedia first started up, it was a bit of a Wild West because anybody can add anything up onto Wikipedia and edit it. However, they've been really good over the last few years. Their most popular articles tend to be written by professionals. So a good example here is philosophy on Wikipedia. Wikipedia actually emailed out and asked philosophy professors all over America if they would populate their articles with professionally written academic expertise, with their expertise, and they agreed. So if you go onto Wikipedia and you search anything to do with philosophy, which was partially my degree, the articles on there are absolutely brilliant. And for mainstream things that you would want to search, if you search climate change, for example, the article that will be written there will be of a very, very high quality. So Wikipedia can be really, really useful. Obviously, though, if you have to turn in a piece of work, you don't just copy and paste Wikipedia, but that should be obvious to you. Wikipedia has been getting better and better and better as time goes on. and it has now become a really, really powerful source of information. Put it this way, when I was your age, I used to have to get a DVD called Encarta. I used to have to stick it into my PC. I used to have to wait 5 minutes for it to load up. I used to have to then double click on Encarta, and then I used to have to wait 5 more minutes, and then I would type into a search bar, and then it would give me a rubbish little article about whatever it was I was looking up. And Wikipedia is immediate, and it gives you an oftentimes excellent article about most things. One problem with Wikipedia, just to be aware of, is it can be dense, it can be over-detailed. Some of the articles on there are really, really, really super detailed, and you probably won't need that when you're doing your own research. Okay, BBC Bitesize is getting better and better and better, and during lockdown, it's really, really good now. And they have lessons that you can follow day after day, but they also just have tons of GCSE content on there, tons of content for year 7, 8 and 9. And I would just strongly recommend you go on there and browse, look around at things that interest you, and you'll be on there for quite a while. You've got specific lessons for hundreds of topics. The one thing that I always recommend to students to do is to go above your level. So go and look at some year 10 work. Go and look at some GCSE work if you're in year 7, 8 or 9, and you will find it really interesting. You'll test yourself and challenge yourself. Okay, final one, careful Googling, and this is the one to be the most careful with. Before I say anything, it's really important to remember your safety online. So you never go onto a website that you don't trust. If you ever feel uncomfortable or unsure when you're on a website, you just immediately leave that website. You never download anything that you are suspicious of. You never give over personal details online. All of these things that hopefully you should be aware of. You should never share images of yourself with anybody asking, particularly strangers online. So try to use reliable sources when you're Googling. So I just said that you've got all these newspapers or TV news sites that are reliable. So try to use those when you are Googling for things. So what I mean by that is you put into Googling volcanoes. Now, if one of those news sites comes up, you know that has been carefully researched by a professional journalist. YouTube and other video sites are fantastic, but you've got to use them really, really carefully. And you've got to make sure that you're not accessing things like conspiracy theories or poorly researched content, or just some bloke in their bedroom who's just sounding off because he's angry with the world. That's not going to educate you very well. You need to make sure that you are accessing videos, again, from reliable sources. And if you ever feel like a website doesn't feel right, it seems strange, it doesn't look professional, just get off that website straight away. You really don't want to be unsafe when you're online. This is a good example here. We've got, I just searched Black Lives Matter because obviously that's currently in the news. When you Google it, you've got loads of information that comes up immediately. Now, the top Google search here is actually the official Black Lives Matter website. That is reliable. That is exactly where you should go to try and find out about them. That will be even better than the Wikipedia page, although again, I would be surprised if that Wikipedia page was written by anybody other than the Black Lives Matter movement, to be honest. But then look down here at the top stories with the videos. We've got a video of Meghan Markle from Hello magazine. We've got the Conservative candidate for the mayoral election, Sean Bailey, in the Daily Mail. And then we've got a story from Bristol Live, which is a local Bristol news site, I think. Those, if you just click on those, will not inform you really well about the Black Lives Matter movement. What they will tell you about is what Hello magazine and what the Daily Mail and Bristol Live think is important as of a few hours ago. So when you are Googling things, you want to go for the real core main topic that you're looking for. And here, if you're going to search something like Black Lives Matter, go to their website and their website only. Okay, final one, personal interests. And this is kind of relatively straightforward, to be honest. And it's going to use a lot of the principles that I've spoken about so far. So social media can be actually really useful for this. If you're really into skateboarding or really into rugby or really into whatever sport or hobby it might be, YouTube is fantastic for this. So I was really into comedy when I was a little bit younger, and still am to an extent. That's why I'm so funny. And YouTube is unbelievably good for comedy. It basically has every single sketch ever written and put on TV. And so for me, one of my great joys is just sitting on YouTube and looking up comedy clips and videos from my favourite shows, going all the way back to the 90s and the 80s. And so that's wonderful, that's safe, that's just a really nice activity that you guys can do. That's where, if you're not trying to get news, that's where you can go down a bit of the rabbit hole with YouTube there and have some real fun. Because if you're into skateboarding and you want to watch skateboarding videos, that's the place to do it. Instagram has a similar kind of vibe about it, and Facebook as well. You will just get that same content coming through the more that you follow people who follow that sort of thing. And similarly with Snapchat as well, although obviously a little bit more fleeting with Snapchat. Again, for personal interest, just make sure that those websites you go to are the official websites, well-run websites, big organizations, magazines, newspapers, all of those kinds of large, effective, professionally run websites, and you should be absolutely fine for researching your own personal interests. All of those principles that I've spoken about today apply. Think about the source of what you are studying. Think about the source and where it comes from, and you want to go for the official, professional sources as much as you can. Excellent sources. So these are just a few ideas. New Scientist is a wonderful magazine that talks about everything in the world of science. You can access that website really easily. I've added the links here when you go onto the actual PowerPoint. National Geographic is a long-running magazine that displays photography and stories from around the world, particularly good for those who are interested in, obviously, geography. The Economist is a fantastic magazine which looks at everything to do with money and economics from around the world. It is a centre-right magazine, so it will be slightly supportive of, as we showed before, slightly supportive of right-wing policies. And just to kind of summarise again what I've talked to you about. So we've talked about news and current affairs, accessing those reliable news sources and having those on your phone so that you're checking the professionally run organisations first. Academic resources, we talked about Bitesize and Wikipedia and Googling effectively to make sure that you are accessing reliable and good information. And finally, your own personal interests. Feel free to dive into those apps as long as you're doing it in a really safe and effective way. Okay, thank you very much for listening.